However, in today's class, we're going to be focusing on specific foods to help manage nausea. We'll also talk about those ones to avoid and which foods are best to eat when you are experiencing nausea. So as we move through the 3 different recipes, you'll get lots of tips and tricks. In general, though, these foods tend to be a little bit more bland. Dry, and some of them liquid-based that are low in fiber, low in fat. So let's get started.
We're going to get started. So like Stephanie mentioned, with the first recipe, we're actually going to make some scones. And these are some savory lemon scones. Now, the way we're going to sort of position each recipe is we're going to give you sort of the base recipe, and that would be sort of like a stage 1 where it's pretty neutral, pretty bland, not bland, but doesn't have any really strong flavors.
Right.
Then we're going to give you some options so that maybe if you're at a stage 2 or stage 3, or maybe you're not experiencing nausea, then you can sort of increase the flavors and play around with it a bit more.
Adapt it.
Exactly. Yeah. So for these scones, really simple. We have about a cup and a half of flour, a little bit of baking powder, and a little pinch of salt. I'm just using regular white all-purpose flour, unbleached. This seems to be a little bit better for nausea, right?
So, generally speaking, when we look at the literature, most people tend to in order to help manage those nauseated symptoms, is really separating dry foods from liquid or fluids, okay? And the ones that are more bland, more dry, starchier ones tend to be better at helping people manage those nauseous symptoms. And it's also really important to eat, even if you are experiencing nausea. Because having an empty stomach actually could, prolong that nauseated feeling, but also you need the energy.
Yeah, and so
white flour.
We're using white flour. That doesn't mean if you do want to add some whole wheat flour, if you're okay with that, you can absolutely cut it into this or just make it all whole wheat flour. The recipe, it's a baked recipe, but it's not like the science experiments that you're used to with a lot of like cakes and baked recipes. Scones are supposed to be super easy, super rustic, really messy. So it's really easy to change some of the ingredients as you need. So flour, baking powder, a little bit of salt, and now we're going to cut in our butter. You can use other fats. If you don't want to use butter, you want to use some like olive oil, for example. You can absolutely sub in olive oil instead. You're not going to get the flakiness that you would from butter. Because we're talking about nausea and probably what comes with it might be smaller bites and limited bites, we're going for something, we're not afraid of the calories here, or the butter, so we're going to go with butter for today. But you can sub it if you want. The other important thing with butter for this recipe is that we want to grate the butter into the flour. So if you stick this in the freezer for like 5-10 minutes, just so it becomes nice and hard, then it will grate a lot easier. You can see it's almost like cheese. Mm-hmm. Don't be tempted to just eat a handful of this. And I'm not going for too much. I'm going for about 4 tablespoons of butter, which is about half of this stick. And the reason that I'm grating it in is because we want to create these little sort of pockets and pieces of flour and fat or butter. And this is what is going to give the scones that really, really nice flakiness. So it's important that it's cold. If it was a warm butter, or if it was like soft and I'm mixing it in, or mixing it all with my hands and that's warming it up, it's going to melt through and you're going to completely lose that effect of the flakiness. So it's important to use really cold butter. And instead of just using my hands right away, because the warm hands would sort of start to melt it, just use like a spoon or a knife and just kind of cut it through, just so that it mixes together and you start to see these almost like pebble or pea-sized pieces come together. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. This is meant to be really rustic. So just like that. So you can see how we have these like little clumps of butter in there. Again, I want those to remain solid. And then you can add your liquid. I mean, that's it. That's all it is. So you can add a little bit of milk. You can add a little bit of butter, or like a lactose-free milk, or substitute any liquid to actually create the dough. Before I do that, this is your opportunity to add any flavors if you do want. If you want to keep it neutral, especially when it starts to bake, even mild aromas might trigger. So just keep that in mind. But if you're okay with some flavors, absolutely go ahead and experiment. I've added a few options on your actual recipe page. Today we're going to do a lemon oregano, but you can absolutely make these even sweet. You can do like blueberry and orange zest, or you can throw some cheddar cheese in there. That's always really tasty, and maybe some rosemary.
Yeah, and other kind of herbs that, so particularly oregano, there's been some research that shows that it helps regulate nausea, so decrease those effects. We hear a lot about the ginger, but oregano is one of them. And of course, always we're looking for those phytonutrients, which are found in plant-based foods, high in antioxidants, high in anti-inflammatory properties, and really help with boosting immune system. So kind of when you're able to kind of get those specific herbs into the foods that you're preparing, that's always a great idea.
Throwing some lemon zest in there as well. Again, that zest of the lemon, of an orange, of a lime has all those essential oils, so you're getting a lot of flavor in there as well. So yeah, so flavor whichever way you want, and then we're gonna add our liquid. So I'm actually gonna go for yogurt with this. Again, a way we can sort of sneak in some more protein. Yeah,
exactly.
And it gives you some nice creaminess as well.
Yeah, and actually, on that note, the Greek yogurt, like Jeremy said, has more protein than, let's say, other liquids. So adding it in when you can, you might find it easier to kind of eat small meals throughout the day, or like snacks, and kind of just assess for yourself, when is the best time of day that you kind of have the energy, or you're less nauseous. So when's the best time to be eating, and kind of pick and choose and make those times the times where you're getting in those calories to help give you the energy for the day.
So I put a measure about 3/4 of a cup on there. You can see I'm kind of adding as I go, and I sort of want you to approach it the same way. So you're looking for a result versus just following exactly the measures I have on there. And we want to sort of mix it together with a spoon or a knife just until it starts to come together like this. And then we can get in there, and probably should have floured my hands ahead of time, but too late, we're already in here. And we're gonna mix it together just until you can tell if I squeeze it together, it would stay. It would form a dough.
Paste, I guess.
Yeah, it's like a dough. It shouldn't be too wet, but it shouldn't be dry either. So if you need to add a little bit more moisture or a little bit more flour, just adjust. Now you can see I barely even put it together, and then I put it onto your clean cutting board and just sort of form it, but don't knead it. Okay, we're not making pasta, we're not making bread. Does anyone know what would happen if I would overwork this? It would become, very hard, very chewy. I'm sure the queen would not approve of these scones. So we just want it to barely come together, and then we can sort of flatten it down into about an inch or so thick. And again, if you need a little bit more flour, on top, just so it doesn't stick to your fingers, which is what it's doing to me. Just sprinkle a little bit more on top. But again, they're not supposed to look really pretty. You want it to be a little bit rough.
Yeah. And, you know, like I mentioned, you want to aim for those dry, textured foods. So other things that, you know, if you don't have the time to make scones, or you don't have the energy, or you don't feel well, you always could go with tea biscuits or dry crackers, toast, any type of kind of like a mashed potato or rice, like things that are more starchy are great. But this is always can be a recipe that you ask a loved one or a friend or a family member to perhaps make for you.
Yeah. So I just cut them into triangles. That's the way I make mine. Some people prefer circles. I don't know if this is true, but if it's a savory scone, it's supposed to be a circle. I mean, I don't know. So that's pretty much it. You know, it's supposed to be really easy, really simple to put together. Parchment paper, baking sheet, in the oven, 400 degrees for about 15 minutes. And you want it to get nice and golden brown and flake. Sorry, before I put it in there, it just helps with the top. You can add either a little bit more extra butter or a little bit of olive oil, or some people brush the top with milk. You can do that as well. Maybe some more oregano, why not? Unless you don't like it. Okay, so that goes in. And 15 minutes. All right. And here we go. So that's what you want it to look like. So it should be nice and golden brown on top. It should have a nice flakiness on the side, like this. And I mean, that's pretty much it. You can freeze this.
Excellent.
That's it.
Thank you.
Fantastic.